So, as we kick off 2026, the world's oceans are, well, they're a real mix of things. They're staged for some of the most fascinating and, frankly, conflicting forces of our time. Today, we're going to try to make sense of it all, connecting celebrated history with some very real, very new global threats.
Sounds a bit like a trick question, right? I mean, on the surface, these two things could not be further apart. But they're both sending powerful signals about the state of our seas. One represents hope and history, and the other, well, it represents tension and risk. Over the next few minutes, we're going to connect those dots.
Okay, so let's start with something genuinely positive. We're heading to the UK, to the port city of Hull, which is starting 2026 on an absolute high note for its maritime heritage.
And you know, this really is a feel-good story. In a world that feels pretty complicated right now, what's happening in Hull is just a great reminder of our positive connection to the sea. It's setting a really hopeful tone for the whole industry as the year gets going.
And look, this wasn't just a fluke. Hull didn't just get lucky. They earned their spot on National Geographic's prestigious list through a massive, coordinated effort. We're talking about restoring historic ships like the Arctic Corsair, completely overhauling their maritime museum, and pouring huge investments into their nautical landmarks. It's a total masterclass in how to celebrate a city's legacy. Okay, so take a deep breath, because we're about to pivot pretty hard. From those calm harbors, we have to talk about the much, much choppier waters of global security. Because while all that good stuff is happening, new and pretty alarming threats are popping up on the high seas. Over in East Asia, we're seeing a major spike in geopolitical risk. These live-fire drills, they're not just for show. They are a direct, simulated blockade of some of the most vital shipping lanes on the planet. For anyone in the maritime industry, this sets off all kinds of alarm bells. For shipping safety, for routing, even for the cost of insurance in the region. And then there's this, a totally different kind of threat that unfolded literally on New Year's Eve. Finnish authorities grabbed a cargo vessel, the Fitberg. But here's the thing, it wasn't for piracy or smuggling. They were suspected of something way more modern, damaging the critical undersea communication cables that we all rely on. The whole crew was detained, and just like that, a new front in maritime security opened up. This incident, it's a textbook example of what the experts are calling a hybrid threat. And you're going to hear that term a lot in 2026. It's not about big, open battles. The goal here is to get a strategic advantage without a direct fight. It's all about these covert, often deniable actions, like, say, damaging a fiber optic cable with a commercial ship, to create instability and hit the critical infrastructure our modern world runs on. So you can see how things are shifting, right? For decades, when we talked about maritime security, we were talking about things you could see. Pirates, ships colliding, that kind of thing. But now, the biggest threats are almost invisible. We're moving away from open confrontation and into the world of covert ops, from simple robbery on the high seas to complex sabotage deep beneath them. But you know, it's not all about deliberate attacks. The oceans themselves have always been a challenge, and sometimes, even with all our modern tech, things just go wrong. Before we get into what happened next, I just want you to look at this number, 0. Seriously, just focus on that for a second. It's the most important part of this story, because it's the number of passengers or crew who got hurt. Okay, so what happened? The cruise ship Coral Adventurer ran aground, and not just anywhere, but in a super remote part of Papua New Guinea. Now the great news is everyone was thankfully safe. But this event, it sent a real jolt through the entire cruise industry. It's a stark reminder of just how challenging it is to navigate in these remote waters, and it's putting a huge new spotlight on how operators are managing those risks.
All right, so we've talked about physical dangers, but there are these other forces at play, these invisible currents that are just as powerful. We're talking about money and regulations that dictate the cost of moving pretty much everything around the world.
So on January 1st, 2026, a bunch of new EU emissions rules just clicked into place, and you can already see the ripple effect. The big idea is to push the industry toward greener energy, but the immediate impact is basically a three-step chain reaction. First, the new rules hit. Second, the cost of fuel, what's called bunker costs, goes up for ships in places like the Adriatic. And third, now the entire market is just holding its breath to see how this is going to reshape prices and competition for everybody. And of course, this isn't happening in a bubble. The market's already dealing with a bunch of other stuff. You've got the usual holiday season mess, like bad weather slowing down ports. At the same time, carriers are all scrambling to adjust for the upcoming Chinese New Year peak. Long story short, it all adds up to a whole lot of uncertainty as we dive into the first part of the year.
Okay, so let's pull all these different threads together. We've got heritage, we've got geopolitics, safety, economics. What does it all mean for the year ahead? Let's try to chart a course.
There's a quote from ShipsDNA that just nails it, I think. The maritime world is at a crossroads. You see what they mean? On one path, you've got amazing stories like Hull, celebrating history. And on the other, you've got these new hybrid threats and complex rules, pushing the limits of innovation and security.
And as we're looking forward, the source material had this New Year's greeting that just felt perfect for 2026. Clear charts, that's about better navigation and planning. Safe journeys, that's about tackling both the accidental risks and the deliberate threats. And deep data, that's all about having the information you need to handle these new rules and market forces. It really covers it all.
And that really brings us to the big final question here. From tourism and trade to security and sabotage, the oceans connect every single one of us, whether we think about it or not. So as these challenges get more complicated and pop up faster than ever, who's going to write the rules for this incredibly important shared future? That's really the question for 2026 and beyond.